Up until recently, Jews in Israel have been forbidden by the Israeli government to go up on the Temple Mount. Now, this is not due to any kind of political reasons. This is due to them not wanting them to accidentally step on holy ground. We're going to discover why this is no longer the case in today's episode on Battle Ready Believers. Hey guys, and welcome to Battle Ready Believers, where our goal is to help you become the man or woman of God that you are called to be. Now, if you'd like to follow us along in our future studies, be sure to click the necessary buttons down below so you don't miss out on any future content. Now let's get started in God's Word. In my studies, I use several different versions of the Bible. The one that I prefer most often is the Scriptures. It just seems to have the most accurate translations when it comes to Hebrew and Greek translations to the English language. That's why I prefer that one. Now, I do go back and forth in multiple different versions just to make sure I have a clear understanding of what's being said. So let's start out today in Revelation chapter 11, verse 1 and verse 2. And a reed like a measuring rod was given to me, and the messenger stood saying, Rise and measure the dwelling place of Elohim, and the slaughter place, and those worshiping in it. But cast out the court which is outside the dwelling place, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations, and they shall trample the set apart city underfoot for 42 months. Now again, the reason why I prefer using this version of the Scriptures most often is again because of its more accurate translation of Hebrew and Greek words over to the English language. In this one, you're going to find a very specific mistake that is generally made amongst other versions. Where it says dwelling place, that is the accurate translation, where most versions will say temple, and that's where some of the confusion comes in. So it's actually referencing a dwelling place. It doesn't necessarily have to have a temple, and we'll get to some of that here in just a moment. In these scriptures, John was told by the messenger to measure the naos, or dwelling place of Elohim, and the altar. So two different things that needed to be measured. Now in recent years, Dr. Lean Rittmeyer, one of the foremost archaeologists and architects in Israel, has also done the exact same thing. He's done some measurements, and he's written a pretty interesting book you ought to check out. In his book, The Quest, you'll learn about the discovery of the 500 cubit by 500 cubit square where Solomon's temple originally stood. He also points out that on that rock, which is the highest point on the Temple Mount, and that rock that is located inside the Islamic dome of the rock, there is a cutout that is the exact dimensions of the Ark of the Covenant. Now, whether this is true or not, or whether you or I believe it or not, is irrelevant. What does matter is the fact that the Jewish Sanhedrin does believe it. And because they believe that this is where the Holy of Holies was and where the Ark of the Covenant sat, they believe that they have been able to accurately measure out exactly where the temple stood. And because they think they know where the temple stood, they also know where each individual item would have been placed. One of those items would be the altar. So this is why they have become so liberal with allowing people to walk on the Temple Mount, because they now believe that they know where each individual item stood, and that there's not going to be a risk of a Jew stepping on these holiest of holy sites. Now, the reason why this is so important is because up until now, there hasn't been an opportunity for there to be any sacrifices done on the Temple Mount. The Jews believe that in order to do a sacrifice, it must be done, or the altar must be built and sacrifices completed in the exact location where the altar originally was. They reference 1 Chronicles 21 and believe that a new altar must be built in the exact same location, to which they now believe they know exactly where it's at. Now, the location where they believe that the altar once stood is not located inside the Dome of the Rock, and therefore they now have the ability to build an altar and start sacrifices. But how could this be? Are the Muslims going to allow Jews to commence sacrifices on the Temple Mount? Well, they just might. Dov Stein, president of the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, wrote a letter to both President Trump and to Benjamin Netanyahu in regards to the worldwide coronavirus pandemic. In this letter, he laid out the details of how a sacrifice was able to stop a plague during the Exodus. Although it wasn't mentioned in the letter, there are other examples in the Bible where sacrifices were used to end a plague, or pandemic as we call it. This letter was well received among the Israeli government. However, the Muslim Waqf is who is in control of the Temple Mount. They are the ones that have to be convinced that this is something that's necessary to end the pandemic. You see, Muslims understand the sacrificial system related to Passover, and they believe Moses to be a prophet. In addition, they also believe the Exodus really happened. They actually celebrate this on their holy day, Ashura. The only difference is that they believe the Exodus occurred during Yom Kippur, or Day of Atonement, rather than Passover. And this is why it may not be so difficult to convince the Muslim Waqf to allow the sacrifice on the Temple Mount. Now, the Jewish leaders have been extremely liberal with their decision making on moving forward with building an altar that a sacrifice could be made on. And they're doing so without the requirement of an actual third temple being built, as long as the altar is built in the exact same location of where David built his altar. So now we have the Israeli government, the Jewish Sanhedrin, and most likely very soon the Muslim Waqf, all ready and willing to start sacrifices on the Temple Mount this year. Now, in our last video, which I'll be sure to leave a link right up here and down in the description below, we gave a breakdown and showed you how the temple where the abomination of desolation takes place cannot be one's body. We also showed you that the holy place spoken of does not necessarily mean a physical temple. The bottom line is this: sacrifices could begin on the Temple Mount as early as this year. Once the sacrificial system has started, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be able to continue making sacrifices at that point. It doesn't take a biblical scholar to realize how close we are, or how close we could be, to the abomination of desolation. Being as the holy place spoken of during the abomination of desolation is a geographical location and not necessarily inside a physical temple, it wouldn't be very difficult for the Antichrist to end the daily sacrifices and then walk over about 25 meters or so and stand in the holy place, or sit in the holy place. Please be sure to leave your comments below on how you think this could all play out. I don't claim to know everything, and I know the Father reveals new things to us all the time. So I'd love your input on helping us decipher biblical prophecy. If you got anything out of this video or in this channel, please be sure to hit all the necessary buttons down below so you don't miss out on any future content. And please, share it with others. I'd love to hear what they have to say also. And we'll see you next time on Battle Ready Believers.
Like a bird on a tree, I'm just sitting here. I got time.